Holy shit. Holy shit. Grab a blanket, turn off your lights for holy shit moments. We were stalked and almost killed by a crazy prostitute. This is gonna be extremely long, so I apologize in advance. I'm not entirely sure if my story should be posted here, since we knew who was stalking us the whole time, but just couldn't prove it, and technically, it wasn't just me who was being stalked, but my whole family. I'm gonna post anyways though, because the experience was friggin' terrifying. To give a little bit of background information, this started in the winter of 2012. I was 23 years old at the time and living with my dad. My mom and my brother were living in another house about 10 minutes away from us. One morning, I woke up around 8 a.m. because I had an early doctor's appointment, and I went outside to see a note pinned to the windshield wiper of our car. The note said, "I'm going to kill you, fucking pedophile scum." I kinda just laughed it off. I assumed the note was for my dad, who had a habit of complaining to parents in our neighborhood about their children's shitty behavior. I thought one of the parents was just being a douchebag, so my dad and I didn't bother with it too much. Later in the day, while talking to my mom on the phone, I mentioned the note to her offhandedly in a very casual way, and I was shocked by her response. She responded by very emphatically warning me several times to make sure all my windows and doors were locked and to bring a weapon to bed with me at night. I was a bit taken aback because she never said anything to me like that before. She never even given me the good touch, bad touch talk. She reminded me at least 12 times over the course of the conversation to bring a knife or a baseball bat to bed with me and to lock my bedroom door at night. I thought she was just overreacting, so I waved her off. Then, other weird things started happening. We started getting random packages and deliveries sent to our house, Bibles and Qurans, newspapers, porn flyers, pizzas, and moving trucks that hadn't been ordered. The first few times it happened, I thought it was just a mistake. But as it kept happening, I came to the conclusion that somebody must be pulling a prank on us. We didn't know who it was, so there was nothing we could really do about it, but apologized profusely to yet another confused pizza delivery man. In September of that year, I started taking a night class with my best friend. The course went from 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. every Monday and Wednesday night, and after the class, his mom would pick us up and drive us home. Sometime in November, his mom dropped me off from school, and I went inside and chilled on the couch for a couple of hours. I ended up falling asleep on the couch. Something woke me abruptly at about 4 in the morning. I heard the unmistakable sound of a car tire being slashed, and it sounded like our car. What the hell was going on? We didn't have any enemies. In retrospect, this was probably a stupid thing to do, especially considering that I'm a relatively small female, but I grabbed a generic kitchen knife and went outside to check it out. When I got outside, I discovered immediately that I was correct. There was a man in our driveway slashing our car tires. Unwisely, I immediately yelled, "Hey, you!" And he turned around to face me. That was when I noticed what he was slashing our tires with. An enormous hunting knife, at least 6 inches long. He looked surprised, but then defiant, and began to advance towards me with the knife slightly raised. I just froze. I didn't know what to do. He was coming at me so fast, I couldn't even think. Thankfully, at that exact second, my across-the-street neighbor, who had also heard him slashing our tires, turned on his porch light and yelled out the window, "Hey, I'm calling the cops!" The man yelled back, "I don't give a fuck! Call them then!" But he quickly retreated back to his car, where I could see a middle-aged woman with long brown hair waiting for him in the passenger seat. Our eyes locked, and I knew instantly that we had met before, but I could not put my finger on where or when. I just knew in my gut that I had met this woman before. They sped off into the night, and we called the cops, who said they couldn't do anything for us because they didn't know who had done it. I called my mom to tell her what happened and to ask her if she had any idea who would have done this to us. She immediately said no, but there was something in her voice. I could just tell she wasn't being honest. A few weeks later, I decided to go to my mom's house to spend a day or two there, determined to get some answers. As soon as I walked in the front door, I knew something was wrong. The second she saw me, she just started bawling her eyes out. She took me by the hand and sat me on the couch and explained the whole story to me, start to finish. It's necessary for me to give a little bit of background information here. My mother is a businesswoman by trade. She's also a bit of a hippy-dippy, astrology impotent, reincarnation and Mercury is retrograding, so don't get into an argument this week type of person. On the side of her regular day job, she was also selling Arbonne makeup, which is an all-natural brand of makeup that is free of parabens, oils, sulfates, and other common cosmetic additives. A couple of months before this all started, she had ended up being referred a new client named Andrea by her weed dealer. Yes, my mom smokes weed. This is Canada. Everyone smokes here. Andrea was her dealer's girlfriend, and she was interested in buying Arbonne. So my mom invited her over to her apartment to look at some makeup samples. They started chatting a bit about a variety of topics, as women are known to do, and my mom let it slip that her last name was Hayes. As my mom told me, Andrea had paused for a few seconds, looked at her, and then said, "Hayes? Did you used to be married to a man named Darren Hayes?" My mom answered that yes, Darren Hayes, my father, was her ex-husband, and then, shockingly, this Andrea woman had actually burst into tears, threw her arms around my mom in a hug, and began to tell her this horrific story about all the disgusting things that my dad had done to her. Apparently, when she was 14 years old, she was now in her mid-30s. I would have been about 4 years old at the time. This would have been around 1994. She had been dating a man named Andrew, who happened to be living with my dad at the time after my parents' divorce. According to Andrea, these men, her boyfriend Andrew, Andrew's twin brother Daniel, and my father, had taken turns beating her, raping her, and then forcing her to prostitute herself in order to make money off of her. Eventually, they ended up selling her into child prostitution, from which she has never recovered. At this point, I realized that this is where I'd recognized her from. My dad had been roommates with her boyfriend Andrew, and I used to see all three of them when I went over to visit him every second weekend. She sobbed inconsolably during the whole retelling of the story, telling my mother how after this traumatic experience, she had turned to drugs and alcohol to numb the pain of her abuse, and that she'd been addicted to crack and alcohol off and on ever since because of what my father had done to her. My mom was shocked. She didn't know what to do. On the other hand, she knew my father to be a generous, soft-spoken, and kind person who had never lifted a finger to her or any other person, and who rarely raised his voice. But on the other hand, it seemed odd that Andrea would just happen to remember his name all these years later if she had been lying. She didn't know who to believe, and after several hours of crying and much consoling on my mother's part, Andrea left finally. That was when the stalking began. A few days after this encounter, my mother came home from work to find Andrea's boyfriend sitting on her couch waiting for her. He immediately told her that he was planning on killing my dad, that my dad deserved to die because he was a pedophile rapist piece of shit, and that if my mom told anybody at all, especially the cops, that he would be sure to kill me as well. He then concluded his threat by describing the layout of our living room and exactly what outfit I was wearing that day. From then on, he and or Andrea would text or call her several times a day to threaten and taunt her, telling her that they were going to call the cops on my dad and have him thrown in prison, that they were going to have him killed, that if she told anybody, that they would hire somebody to rape and murder me. Naturally, my mother was absolutely terrified. She was from an upper middle class family who had immigrated to Canada from Germany. She had never dealt with this type of person before. She stopped eating, she couldn't sleep, and she stopped even going to work. She lost 30 pounds, and her hair started falling out from stress. she started having panic attacks because she didn't know what to do. Eventually, after the night when I almost got stabbed, she decided that she had to call the cops. She just couldn't take the chance that they would hurt me. She had to do something about it. And what she found out was shocking. Andrea was well known to the police. When my mother told them the story, she was so well known that they weren't even surprised to hear her story. In fact, they told her Andrea had done this exact thing to at least a dozen other men. She would meet and blackmail men in giving her money, electronics, drugs, etc., threatening to call the cops and report them for rape if they didn't. Her boyfriend, who was also a dealer of other drugs than just weed, as it turned out, would often use his drug connections to intimidate and extort the men, and for some reason he never questioned her stories of being raped, abused, and enslaved by all these different men. Then, when Andrea, who was a crack and heroin addict and prostitute, would get arrested on a possession or drug distribution charge, she would attempt to make deals with the police by offering them information about men who were rapists and pedophiles in exchange for less prison time. She eventually did this so many times that the police stopped believing her. After my mom called the cops, the whole story became undone, and Andrea and her boyfriend, thankfully, haven't bothered us since. But it's been over a year since the whole incident happened, and I'm still terrified to leave the curtains open at nighttime in case somebody is watching me. I don't think I'll ever be able to feel fully safe in this house ever again. So, Andrea, let's not meet again. Ever. I don't go skinny dipping anymore. I grew up on a small outskirts of a small southern town, and so I spent most of my days of my summer vacations prowling the woods close to my home, about a half-hour walk from my house, down dirt roads and overgrown deer trails. There is a sandy stretch of beach along a creek. Since it was so far removed from civilization, and I had never seen another soul out there at the creek, I would often strip down naked and swim in the water to cool down under the summer sun. When I was a young girl, about 8 or 9 years old, I had gone down to my secret beach to go skinny dipping. I had spent all morning there, watching herons and splashing in the water happily. Suddenly, I began to hear the sounds of something large, forcing its way through the undergrowth upstream a ways. I was frozen, standing naked in the middle of the creek as 2 men emerged from the woods. They were much older than me, probably in their 30s. Something about the way they were dressed scared me. Anyone who has spent a lot of time in the woods knows the danger of thorn vines and brambles. But these guys were dressed in flip-flops, cargo shorts, and wife beaters. They were filthy and covered in scratches across their arms and legs, looking as if hiking through the woods hadn't ever been part of their agenda. I had left my clothes in an untidy pile on the bank, but to grab them, I would have to have moved much closer to the men. As I frantically tried to think of a way to get back to my clothes without alerting these guys, one of them turned and locked eyes with me. Now, I grew up around southern manners, seeing as I was a naked little girl trying to cover myself with my hands as I stood in the middle of a creek. I would have expected him to avert his gaze, but all he did was elbow his buddy in the ribs, point at me, and whisper something beyond my hearing. When they both turned and began to advance towards me, malicious grins on their faces, I officially lost my shit. Luckily, years of spending all my free time in the woods paid off. Forgetting modesty, I turned and ran at breakneck speed for the closest downstream deep channel. As I dove into the water, I could hear the men yelling and splashing behind me, trying desperately to catch up. I had always been at home in the water, and at this point, I swam as though my life depended on it. I knew exactly where I needed to go. Earlier that summer, I had discovered what I thought of as my secret hiding spot. The banks were rocky and sheer on both sides of the creek here, around the bend and downstream from the sandy beach. I had been watching muskrats swimming in the water, and had seen one swim through hanging kudzu vines into what I thought was solid stone. Upon pulling back the vines and scaring the shit out of the muskrat in the process, I found an open space under an overhang of rock. I'd always loved hiding and was immediately smitten with such a perfectly camouflaged spot. But weeks later, in this moment, I thought of it as my best hope. As I came close to my hiding spot, I ducked down and swam underwater to my hole in the stone. I only surfaced once I was safely behind my curtain of kudzu vines. I waited there for several minutes, trying to silence my heavy breathing and slow my rampaging heartbeat, until I heard the sounds of heavy crashing through the underbrush. I screamed a little, but thankfully I clamped a hand over my mouth just in time to muffle it. As the sounds of snapping twigs and rustling leaves got closer, I could hear the men panting and cursing under their breath. It sounded as if they were walking on the edge of the bank a few feet above me. After they had moved down a ways, I heard a thud on the ground and an angry yell, as if one of the men had tripped and fallen. Another voice shushed him and said something that made me tremble. "Shut up! She'll hear you!" I had never been more terrified than at that moment. I cried silently, pressing my back against the rock and praying that they wouldn't find me. Even after I heard their footsteps continuing down the bank and into silence, I remained hidden behind the kudzu. I stayed there, delirious with fear and shivering in the water, until the sun had begun to deep low in the sky. I finally began to make my way back to get my clothes and go home, picking my way along the deer trails that would let me move as silently as possible. When I had gotten close to the beach, I stayed hidden in the undergrowth and watched for several minutes to make sure those two slime balls weren't anywhere around. Thankfully, although I found several footprints circling my clothes and pacing along the bank, the guys were nowhere to be seen. My shirt and jeans were still there, luckily, but my panties were gone. I threw my clothes on and ran the whole way home. I never told my mother about what happened at the creek, because I knew she would ban me from ever going into the woods again. I never saw those guys again, nor did I ever see anyone else down at that stretch of beach after that. But, needless to say, I never went skinny dipping again. So, two creepy men who would chase a naked little girl through the woods, let's not meet. Let's meet. Shit, maybe not. This just happened, so I'm a bit shaky. Kind words would be really appreciated. I suppose I should start off by saying I am a 20-year-old woman. I live in a college dorm room. It is built in a triangular shape, meaning if I look out my window, I can see other people in their rooms. The side of the building is slightly taller than the other side, so I can see more into their rooms than they can into mine. If someone stands at their window, I can see them. I sometimes sit on my desk next to the window to have a smoke, meaning that people can see me. Anyways, for the last few months, a guy on the opposite side of the building, a floor below me, I am on the 4th, he is on the 3rd, has been waving at me in a friendly manner. He seems to never sleep, meaning no matter when I smoke, he seems to be there. For the last month or so, we have been kind of like smoking buddies. He sees me, waves, we awkwardly wave at each other while I smoke. Then I go back to my Reddit recluse on my bed, where no one can see me. I always thought this was coincidence. However, now, I think he might have been looking out his window at me. This morning, about half an hour ago in fact, he seemed really into waving, and was waving me over. He seemed nice enough, so when we came down to the courtyard and waved me down, I thought, why not have a smoke outside instead, and have a chat with this friendly man? He was wearing just a t-shirt, and I was pulling a "it's cold" face, so that if it was awkward, I could blame the cold and make a hasty retreat, so he asked me to go up to his room. He seemed pretty normal and nice. I had no alarm bells going off apart from "this may be awkward." It's pretty normal for people to casually hang out in their rooms, and the way he said it was not sexual. I went upstairs with him to his room. When we were walking up the stairs, I started to feel a bit like a lamb to the slaughter, because he was brushing close to me in a way that was not necessary. There was plenty of room on the steps. I took note of this feeling, however. Because of social etiquette, I kept going. He had not done anything wrong. Running away would have just been too weird for me to do. We got to his room. I took note that he did not lock the doors. He offered me a seat on his bed, and he sat on the chair and we chatted pretty normally. He seemed a bit shaky and admitted that he had been partying earlier this night and morning, so he was still a bit tipsy. His niceness and general normalness meant that this didn't really worry me. A lot of students drank, and after all, he had been waving very nicely at me for a while now. We talked about religion, and I thought my instincts must be wrong, cause he was a Muslim, and a strict Muslim wouldn't make a move on a girl they barely know, right? He asked if I had a boyfriend. A pretty normal question for a guy to ask a girl. I lied and said I did. I always lie about this because I'm awful at rejecting people who ask me out. He moved on to the bed and offered me a lighter, which sent my lamb to the slaughter senses tingling again. However, I have sat on a bed with many a new acquaintances and nothing has happened. And like I said, we are students. Hanging out in our dorms on our beds is what we do. We talked about things for a little while. He was edging closer, and I don't know how it came up, but he made a comment about me looking like a wealthy white girl. This sent my alarm bells going off at deafening volumes, as that coupled with the way he looked me up and down like meat made me feel somewhat like he was thinking, white girls are easy. I'm sorry if this sounds racist. Round here there's a general misconception that white girls are all slutty and up for it. Then he mentions that he has been looking at me for almost 5 months now, saying about Christmas decorations and stuff that I had no idea he could see from the angle that his window is at. In fact, I know he couldn't have seen them. It dawns on me that this guy must have been going up to the 4th floor and looking into my room for ages now without me knowing, seeing further into my room than I ever thought he could. It starts to sound like a stalker. He mentions seeing my bum. I don't parade it in front of my window naked, and I would need to be in front of a window for him to see me anyways. I realize he has been watching me. I made a joke to move the subject on. He laughed and started touching my face. Like, who does that? Apart from Adele, and that is after she has set fire to Rain, so by then you know shit is getting real anyways. I moved his hand away and laughed it off. Social etiquette means I cannot leave without saying goodbye first, so I start to make an excuse. He laughs again, and he starts touching my face, and before I know it, his arm is around me pretty tight, and is going for my face and neck with his mouth while simultaneously using his other hand to try and drag my top down. I say no and try to pull away, but he keeps going for it. No obviously means nothing to this guy. I fear I may be about to get raped. He tightens his grip, and I know I'm about to fall down onto the bed, meaning he'll have me flat out and pretty much defenseless. I think, fuck this. I didn't spend hours in the gym to not be able to overpower a short ass like this. I rip him off of me, which I'm pretty proud of, as he was trying for a vice grip there, and made my polite exit speech. Sorry, I need to get going. Nice to meet you though. Sorry, so busy. Like the fucking polite, following social etiquette even when no one else's douche canoe I am. I get out, see him go towards the door, but by then, I am down the stairs, outside, up my stairs, and in my fucking apartment, with all the doors locked. I think I managed to close my curtains without him seeing. I'm only realizing now, my arm really hurts. My mind automatically blanks horrible experiences from my mind, and I have a bad memory anyways, so I'm already pretty fuzzy with what happened. I think my arm hurts from how tight he had a hold of me, but I'm not too sure. It may be from sitting in a weird angle to type this. I have 3 or 4 days left, living opposite this guy.